So this is the guy who did it. After he did it. After he did it. And his name was Georges Perec. And this is where I want to bring the two threads of the story back together. In the 1960, when Latin squares were in the news, that 10 by 10 Latin square was published as an oil painting on the cover of New Scientist magazine. Not New Scientist, Scientific American magazine. It made the front page of the New York Times. It was a big deal. Euler was wrong. He published, with a mathematician, a very short description of how you would take a Latin square and make it into a story. So here they have a small square, the 3 by 3 case. And all they do is they associate rows, columns, blue numbers, and red numbers with some piece of the structure of a book. Chapters, characters, props, or things you can wear on your head, things you can hold in your hand. And now the square tells you how the book is written. In chapter 1, Jones is wearing a cap and carrying a suitcase. In chapter 1, Smith is wearing a braid, carrying roses, and so on. And then what you have to do is you have to write the book within this structure. You can't deviate from the structure. You have to stick to it. So it's that formal restriction again. And it was actually a number of years before they actually put this into practice. Again, Georges Perec. And what he did when he decided to put this into practice is he took a house in Paris, and he took that 10 by 10 Latin square of Bose, Chicarande, and Parker, and he plopped it down on the house, like that. So you've got a basement level, and then you've got all of these squares, and each of them correspond to exactly one room in the house. He was actually kind of nice. He actually published, I'll put it up here, he told you who lived in each room and what their profession was and stuff like that, so that helps. And then just to make things more fun, he decided that the order of the chapters would be determined by a knight's move in chess. So he put a knight's move here on 6-6, and the next chapter is here, and so on, and going all the way around. And then he wasn't quite satisfied with that. So that would say that the order of the chapters went like this. But he broke it. He breaks the knight move, and no one ever goes into this room that's in the basement of the building. And they refer to it constantly. There's something in there, but we never find out. And at one point, there's a girl in the novel who's eating a cookie. And you know those cookies that are shaped, they have chocolate and they're shaped like buildings? And she's just taken a bite, and it's this corner. You know, fun stuff. And then, he still wasn't satisfied. These Latin squares, he took 23 of them. 23 of these 10 by 10 Latin squares, permuted the rows and the columns and the numbers so that they were still Latin, and assigned meanings to the rows and the columns and the black numbers and the blue numbers in each of the 23 pairs. And that gave him the structure of a novel, which he was not allowed to deviate from. And I just want to give you an example of what these 23 different squares told him for chapter 23. So in chapter 23, the knight's move has determined that it's a large apartment on the first floor left, and that's where Moreau lives. And the Latin squares tell him that someone must be going up, and that there must be classification. It must arise as an issue. He has to plagiarize from Jules Verne and James Joyce in the chapter. There have to be 2 people in the chapter. They're occupants of the apartment. There's various things that have to be in the room, appointment books. Someone has to be dreaming. There has to be paneling and woolen carpets and a post-war antiquity, so on. The chapter should be 10 pages long. It should discuss physiology in 1860. There should be a cat and coal. The room should have a solid color, so on and so on and so on. And then his last pair of squares tells him that he should ignore 4 of these and 3 of them should be wrong. So he goes back up to his list, and he doesn't do Chinese style library, and it's more than 10 pages, and he ignores physiology in 1860, and the paneling is false, and there's a post-war antiquity that's actually a fake in the room. And for every single one of the 99 chapters, he has a big list like this, which has just been published in a giant book of all of his lists and the squares that they came from and all the stuff that he actually did, and that's the book. It's really lengthy, but again, the really astonishing thing is this reads like a normal novel. You can't tell that this kind of formal violence is being done, right? That he had no choice but to put an appointment book there. It's just written in, it's very natural.
What's the title?
It's called Life, a User's Manual, or La Vie Mode d'Emploi in French. And this is an English translation. And this is half of my story. This is a kind of the extreme case of a set of authors taking mathematics and using it to inspire them and building it into their novels at an exceptionally deep level, right? I mean, such formal control that you can't even decide, that another character is going to walk in the room. It's not allowed, right? Because there's only 2 persons in this chapter. And the story makes sense. So the second half of my story is where, by looking in literature, we actually find math problems that are interesting and difficult. And we have to go a little further back in time. And this is not such a great picture, but this is a painting of Dante Alighieri, the Italian poet, who is famous for having written the Inferno with the 9 layers of hell, and all the various different kinds of punishments vividly described in poetry, of the different kinds of horrific punishments that get done to you depending on what you did wrong in life. But he didn't only write the Inferno, he wrote the Purgatory as well. And Purgatory is where, in various interpretations, if you haven't been that bad, or you actually maybe haven't been bad at all, but you actually haven't gotten rid of various inherent kinds of sins, you stick around for a while, and if you show signs of reforming, you'll head on your way up. And then he wrote a 3rd book, The Paradiso, which people don't talk about as much, because it's not as interesting in many ways as these 2. And an author who was really known for going back to Dante and using a lot of purgatorial imagery is Samuel Beckett. And James Joyce also went back and used a lot of Dantean purgatorial imagery. They used them in very different ways. Joyce in a kind of a life-affirming way, Beckett in a less life-affirming way. And this is where I want to start. Beckett wrote a play in the late 70s called Quad, and this is the extent of the play as he published it. It's a square, and a set of paths on the square, and a schedule of players. Player 1, player 2, player 3, and player 4.